right, peeps, welcome to the Culture and People podcast. Nikki, in a couple sentences, tell us who you are and what you do.
I am Nikki Innocent. I am a coach, a consultant, and a speaker, and I do work around authentic, inclusive leadership with a main focus on women's leadership and diversity and inclusion. So what does that look like? Well, for me, my background was in the corporate space, and I was in many times, in many rooms, the only woman of color, and only millennial in the room. So the work that I do as an entrepreneur now working in these spaces is I have a lens on diversity and inclusion with a lens on gender, a lens on race, and a lens on generation. So what does that look like for you as you're watching this or listening to this? So I do individual coaching and work with individuals to really tap into the specific things that make you authentically you as a leader in your life, in your work, in your community, in your family. And then I also work with larger collective groups, so like institutions and community groups, to figure out how we can create space for people to show up authentically as themselves within their community and their space. A lot of times that's opening doors that have been closed, that's shining a light on things that have been in the shadows. And it's really coming together to activate our own shared humanity that I know Anna you're all about as well.
Oh, I think, Nikki, weren't you one of my first long form podcast guests? And so I fell in love with you then. I don't even remember how we found each other, but about your podcast. Do you?
Yeah, creepy, because I came into your LinkedIn inbox and I was like, hey, you want to chat?
But look at what happens, because now I love what you're doing so much. And I think, now more than ever, the world needs you and people like you doing your work. So I'm so happy to have people get to know you a little bit more. So
thank you.
Let's think about what's the best thing for you about influencing culture and people through the work that you do.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting. I will tell you that the word influence is such an interesting thing. So my corporate life was in marketing. That's kind of where my expertise in school was. So I think of influencer and I think of kind of how you're branding yourself, right? And it's so funny because in the work that I do, yes, there's marketing and branding that goes into being an entrepreneur and getting yourself out there. But a big part of why I do what I do is to be a vessel for change. And so a big part of what my calling came through was the fact that I recognized that I had a certain level of privilege growing up in situations that folks that look like me may not have, folks that look like people around me that may not have had the microphone, have had their stories told and their voices heard. And so I saw so many aspects of my identity being kind of suppressed that I was like, I have more of a platform potentially than those who don't, but also I don't have a platform. I know I was in predominantly male, predominantly white, predominantly older organizations. And so I got to witness people climbing the ranks that were different than me for doing less than, or maybe the equivalent of what I was doing, but I wasn't getting nearly as far, nearly as fast, and trying to figure out the systems in play that made that happen. So as an influencer, I think my role is to recognize the privilege that I have and that I've had, and understand the power dynamics at play so I can activate the power of that privilege to create space for those that might not necessarily have always had the privilege that I had or haven't had the microphone. Because the marketer, again, I'll go back to that. I believe in the power of storytelling. And so for me, even if you don't relate to some aspect of my identity, there's likely a story or something I can tell you about my life that you will be able to connect with the humanity that I've got going on, and I'll be able to connect with yours. So I think, being able to step into one another's shoes is the ultimate power of us in order to really create a more inclusive future.
Oh man, you got me all teared up when you're talking there. Oh, I love it, Nikki. You're just so real. And that vessel for humanity or vessel for change and humanity, I think it totally describes who you are. So I'm hearing from other leaders that engaging employees is hard. Maybe now more than ever, who knows? But what are your thoughts?
I think it's so interesting in thinking about that, because I think most of the time we are in kind of this impatient culture, right? We have this Insta culture, whether you're talking about like social media or like instant gratification, 140 characters. I want to be able to have on demand a car come to my door. I want to be able to watch whatever I want to watch. So I think there is this urgency with which we operate that makes it really difficult to overcome the hurdles that we have if we assume that the first step is engagement. And so I think, yes, it is difficult, because in order to have us engage on things that are going to make seismic significant change, there are a couple steps that need to happen beforehand. So the big thing that I talk to people about is having more of a focus on curiosity over certainty. I know, especially in the workplace, right? We've got these resumes that show exactly what our credentials are and how certain our receipts are. But so much of growth and so much of culture creation is being able to look around you and see what's going on, understand who's next to you, what they need, who's in front of you, behind you, what they need. And so I always think about Barbara Love. Dr. Barbara Love has a liberatory consciousness model where it talks about, there's 4 steps, right? So there's awareness. And that is kind of where we are, especially right now in the midst of COVID and racial uprising. We're in a spot where there's so many people within our culture that are becoming more aware of so many facets of what's been going on for people that hasn't necessarily been going on for each and every individual one of us, right? So awareness is such an important phase. And a lot of times we are like, okay, yeah, I saw that one thing, I get it. And so just staying in that space a little bit is important. And so being aware, yes, that's important, but it doesn't go awareness to action. It goes from awareness to analysis, then to action. And so awareness, I think, is a really important part of this idea of engagement. Okay, who am I trying to engage with? What is their world looking like? And then as I get those data points, how do I analyze what that data looks like in the larger scheme of how my culture is set up? So I think that particular part of it is important before you go directly to engagement. The third step is action. So action to me is where the engagement lies. If you don't know who you're talking to or why you're talking to them, it's going to be really difficult for them to engage with you in that action step. And so often in organizations and in our own individual lives, we're so used to kind of press and go and doing it as fast as possible. So I think it's really important to do that kind of groundwork beforehand so you can set yourself up for the employees in your company knowing the why, knowing that you've heard them and knowing that you're with them. So it's a lot easier for them to say yes. That invitation has already been laid out in the earlier stages of getting to know who they are and understanding where they're coming from.
Yes, agreed. And I think so many people think that engagement is it's a thing, and I think it's an outcome, right? Engagement is an outcome of a bunch of other things, right? So it's not a thing you do. It's an outcome of building trust and having psychological safety and building personal connection. And I think that's what makes it hardest for leaders is that they are pulled in a lot of different directions. But now more than ever, if you agree to be a leader, if you opted into that, you can opt out if you're not ready. But now more than ever, this is a big, big job.
Yeah, it's a big job. And I think, the other part of it, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into this, but is just this feeling, but I just want to mention the fourth part, because I do think it's important too, is accountability. So as you're going through this process, we all stumble, no matter how we're going towards change. I mean, think about when you learn how to ride a bike. The idea is that you're going to fall down a bunch of times. So just giving yourself the flexibility and the humanity, again, that you're a human being. It's called human error for a reason, that's supposed to happen. And the only way we move forward with it is to recognize it and figure out how that happened, where that happened, and talking about it out loud so we can move forward.
Oh my gosh, Nikki, you are so freaking brilliant that we're already taking up all of our time. It's like we have a minute and a half left.
Oh, okay.
So let's do this.
Speed talk.
Let's do what advice, targeted piece of advice for organizations that want to improve their culture.
Okay. So I think a big part of this is transparency. I think being transparent, being raw, and being authentic is really, really, really important. And I think showing that. So creating spaces where these conversations are happening. And this taps a little bit more into kind of the generational piece of what I was talking about. So we have this traditional leadership model that I always like to talk to as kind of the Mad Men paradigm. That, sure, everybody's kind of distant from their emotions, distant from one another, trying to get to the top, profit at all cost. Go, 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 go. I can be in this job for a certain amount of time and by that, if I'm here for 5 years, I get this. The modern version of that, and some folks call it millennial leadership, but I like to talk about it as modern leadership because I don't necessarily think it's just a generational thing only. It's a lot more about being able to show up and be heard and bringing all those voices to the table. As we look at the new generations that are coming into the workplace and coming into leadership, there is such a difference in the fact that technology has made it so we have so much information that may have taken those 5, 10, 15 years of work in the past. They're at your fingertips. There's a YouTube video about it. And so really allowing for there to be more voices at the table to have that conversation, again, showing up with curiosity rather than certainty to allow those voices to come in and work together to find a solution that works for everybody. So yeah, there's so many things that I can go into on this. I know, Anna, I will give you a whole resource list of books that I think people should look at if they're interested. But yeah, I think really tapping into the humanity side of it and not being afraid of that. That is what brings especially new talent to the party and keeps talent there as they feel like, okay, I can show up and maybe be a little bit vulnerable in this workplace right now because it's safe to do that because this leader did that, or because my manager did that, or because my coworker did that. They showed up as themselves and it was okay. And I actually know them more and appreciate them more because I can see more of who they are as a person.
Oh, yes. God, I wish we could just talk for 20 more minutes or 2 more hours or something like that. But guys, please check out Nikki. She is real. She's an expert in generations and diversity, inclusion, and humanity. Just a wonderful person. Thank you for
and women's leadership. If there are any women here that are looking at women's leadership work and finding themselves feeling a little weird there, I'm your girl.
You are the girl. Oh,
I'm your person. Let's go.
You are the human. Thank you, Nikki.